I think Putin doesn't feel that he is under serious pressure and he doesn't feel serious resolve.
Yeah.
So he feels he can continue the war. And I would much rather see us in the position of laying on those secondary sanctions and even more pressure on the Russian economy to try to hasten the day when Putin finally concludes he's got to end it.
Kurt Volker, who is President Trump's former special envoy to Ukraine. Ambassador, welcome to the program again.
John, thanks. Great to be with you.
It's good to have you here. And also now welcome to Matthew Bartlett, who's a Republican strategist and who served in the State Department during President Trump's first term. Matthew, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you, John.
Thank you for coming. Now, Ambassador Volker, can I come to you first? And do you accept that it is reasonable for Zelensky and those European leaders to be rather fearful for Ukraine, given the way that President Trump fell into step with Vladimir Putin in Alaska?
Well, it's too early to say. I appreciate what President Trump has done. I mean, he's gotten everybody talking, everybody engaged, everyone from Keir Starmer and Merz, Mark Rutte, Putin himself, Zelensky. This is now the top of the agenda. That's an achievement. That's good. Now, he heard out Putin deliver his maximalist position, which is what's mine is mine and what's yours you're going to give me too. It is, keeping everything he's taken and demanding more. Trump did not endorse that, but he did kind of say in his X tweet Sunday night that it's now over to Zelensky and he can make peace right away, which essentially means Ukraine can surrender and there would be so-called peace. But that's not going to happen. Zelensky is not going to just endorse that.
No.
But the dynamic that could come out of this meeting today, we've heard Putin's maximalist position, which is unacceptable for a variety of reasons. Zelensky and European leaders can come forward with their position, which is far more reasonable and achievable. And that then creates some brackets, and you can start a dynamic negotiating. That would not be a bad outcome if that's what happens.
So if it's the beginning of a negotiation and there could be further give and take on both sides and you end up with an acceptable agreement, then that would look like a positive outcome. As I speak, I should say, President Macron of France has pulled up at the White House to join the other leaders inside that, through that famous doorway. Ambassador Volker, though, when you say that President Trump did not line up with Putin, he did abandon the call for a ceasefire. That was much closer to Putin's position, and that was a change. He said he abandoned all of that tough talk about sanctions against Russia, and that was another gain for Russia. So it's not quite right to say that the President of the United States didn't move towards the Russian leader, because, Ambassador, he did.
No, what I said is he did not endorse Putin's position on seizing all of that territory and demanding more. You're absolutely right about the ceasefire. It was Trump's push. If you remember back to February and early March, it was Trump who was pushing Zelensky to agree that Ukraine would accept a ceasefire in place immediately. And Zelensky agreed. And then since then, Putin has rejected a ceasefire every step of the way, including now this meeting in Alaska. And Trump changed his position to say, okay, we'll forget the ceasefire. We'll just go for the full peace deal, which is not going to happen quickly. And I think it actually is not as bad for Ukraine as it sounds, because the military situation and the economic situation is deteriorating for Russia. Ukraine is able to strike deep inside Russian territory. They're taking out a lot of military logistics. The economy is in bad shape with high inflation, high interest rates, labor shortages, part shortages. So Putin is running against the clock a little bit now, too. So I'm not so sure that it's just a one-sided advantage for Russia if there's not an immediate ceasefire.
Okay. Matthew Bartlett, who was in the State Department during the first Trump term. Tell me, what do you make of what you've heard there, Matthew?
Would largely concur with a lot of what the ambassador said. I think it's also important to recognize that there is reporting that in the 3-hour meeting, Putin told Trump, I want all of Donetsk region. And Trump said, well, if that's the case, maybe we should end this meeting and walk out. And then Putin retreated from that. So it seems as if there is some negotiations. It seems more importantly, it seems as if President Trump did not simply kowtow to the Russian narrative to fully endorse some sort of, Putin Putin's line here. I think it was an important meeting on Friday. Equally important is the meeting that will happen in just a few hours, if not minutes. And directionally speaking, the fact that we are now talking, we are trying to, end this horrific war is brutal. And sometimes a peace process is just as brutal, yet far preferable than the ongoing devastation, the killing machine that we have seen for years and years. I'm not sure anyone believes that this will end with a military victory or capitulation. This will end diplomatically. It is very difficult. And sometimes you need to sit down with the devil. You need to deal with the devil, sometimes compromise with the devil, knowing full well that the devil is not trustworthy. And I think it's important that we now have what looks to be the seeds of a security proposal for Ukraine, some sort of non-NATO agreement, which would, again, if this were to come to fruition, ensure safety for Ukraine. This is right and there is wrong here. Putin is a murderous, invading dictator, yet we are where we are, and peace is a very difficult process. We'll see what happens today.
Okay, but Matthew, the Russian media do seem to have seen what happened in Alaska as being very much to the advantage of Vladimir Putin. These are the words of Dmitry Medvedev, who was Putin's former partner at the top of Russian government. He says this, and I'm quoting, he says, the meeting in Alaska, the meeting proved negotiations are possible without preconditions and can take place simultaneously with the continuation of the special military operation. That's the Russian term for their invasion of Ukraine. And that, Matthew, is true. It was a big diplomatic victory for Putin, wasn't it?
I disagree fully. You can show up in your old aged CCCP sweatshirt. You can talk about, whatever. We flew a B-2 bomber over his head. That was not an honor. We did not honor Iran's nuclear program. And the notion of, it's 2025. The notion of this photo op is somehow going to change the dynamics of an ongoing war or public perception or the global stage. Yeah. Listen, we're trying to create a process for peace, knowing full well that it is very tough. The alternative status quo is abhorrent right now.
Okay, I mean, Ambassador Volker, just to look back on that last meeting while we look ahead to the next one about to take place at the White House, President Putin was, I suggest, greeted with honor, with enormous honor. That fly past of the stealth bomber accompanied by U.S. Air Force jets, the red carpet, the president of the USA clapping, applauding at the sight of the Russian leader. This was honor indeed, wasn't it? It wasn't a show of strength. It was never going to intimidate Putin. It was meant to honor him.
Right. No, that's certainly the case, John. I agree. I agree with Matt. I think the flyover was a bit of a warning to Putin. Don't mess with us. We flew into Tehran. We took out their nuclear program and left, and they didn't even know it was coming. With your Russian-made radars, by the way. So I think that was a bit of a warning. But overall, you're right that this was designed to be honoring Putin, giving him a head of state reception, red carpet, etc. I think what Matt is saying, though, is, and I tend to have some sympathy, if that is the price you pay to get an end to a horrific war, well, okay. But unfortunately, I don't think Trump got anything for that. I think it's reasonable to make these kinds of gestures if you get something for it. If Putin moves a bit, if he takes a gesture towards a ceasefire or something, but he didn't do that. Now, maybe Trump was hoping that with this kind of show, he would get a ceasefire out of Putin, and he clearly didn't. And I think it now looks bad in hindsight that he went to all this effort, Trump went to all this effort to honor Putin, and he actually didn't get anything from Putin.
Doesn't that make the case then for President Trump to do what he threatened to do in the days and the weeks leading up to the summit on Friday and this summit today, which is to get tough with Putin, which is to apply the kind of economic pressure which could bear on the mind of the Russian leader?
Absolutely. And this is something that should have been done back in January and any time since then. The argument, and you heard this yesterday from Secretary of State Rubio, their argument is that, well, if we go down the road of putting sanctions and secondary sanctions in place, That's going to make a diplomatic, negotiated solution harder. It's going to push off an end to the war by months, if not a year or more. So we don't want to go down that road. I think that's exactly the opposite of the case. I think Putin doesn't feel that he is under serious pressure and he doesn't feel serious resolve.
Yeah.
So he feels he can continue the war. And I would much rather see us in the position of laying on those secondary sanctions and even more pressure on the Russian economy to try to hasten the day when Putin finally concludes he's got to end it.